Hello, and welcome back to the Just Follow Joy podcast. My name is Ariana Joy. I'm your host, and I'm a human design reader and teacher. And today we are talking to Juliana James and Becca Daly all about the unconscious shadow, aka your existential kink, and how to use that to create more of what you want in life, like what you truly, deeply desire. There are a few things I want to mention before we jump into the episode. So the first thing is that what we're talking about is basically shadow work. And I know that on this podcast, we focus more on the light and the fun and the exciting and ease and joy. It's just follow joy. But if we have a repeated pattern or painful situation or thing we don't want in our lives, or we feel really blocked from having the thing that we want, then in my experience, it's been really helpful to look at the shadow, which is essentially a part of ourselves that we've disowned. We've said, that's not good, I don't like that, and kind of forced it down and shoved it down. The thing about the shadow is that it has this funny way of popping up and saying, I'm still here, and then can, manifest in our lives through things that we say that we don't want, because consciously we don't really want them, but the subconscious is like, I'm a little demon, I will pop up. And so looking at this stuff, it's not, first off, it can be a little heavier, right? It's not anything crazy that we talk about, but it's not necessarily what we always talk about on the podcast. And so it can feel a little heavier and not always that great at the beginning, but shadow work is actually about the light. It's about transmuting the shadow into the light. So in my experience, it's been super helpful if we have these patterns or these blocks to just look at this, to acknowledge this with a ton of self-love and self-compassion, basically. So the point of this is really just to become aware of these things. And the second point I wanted to make comes from the first, about having compassion for ourselves as we go through this. If you're listening to this episode and thinking about, like, where might my existential where might my existential kink show up in my own life, and it's popping up for you and you're like, oh crap, don't like that, that makes me feel really bad about myself. It's so important to come at this with a lot of love for yourself as much as possible, and not shame or blame yourself. I think shame and blame are a really big reason why most people don't take advantage of shadow work, because they think that looking at the parts of ourselves that we don't like, or that we think are wrong or bad, or that we think would be easily criticized, that entails blaming and shaming ourselves, because like, oh, I could have done things differently, why am I doing that? If I'm making this choice, then that means that it's my fault and I'm bad. Not the case, and so unnecessary and so unhelpful. So if you can come at this with at least neutrality, that's going to be the best possible way to look at this stuff. Anyway, this is a really great episode, super powerful. I'm really excited to share it with you. And real quick, don't forget, if you like the show, if you could like and subscribe on YouTube, that would be super helpful. If you're listening on another platform, if you could leave whatever form of positive feedback you can leave there, that would also be helpful and appreciated. But that's it for me. So let's dive in and hear from Juliana and Becca. All right, so we have Becca and Jules here, which is great. They're three Peters, they're repeat offenders, and they're back. And the reason why I wanted to pull them on specifically for this episode is because I had a really, really lovely session with them talking about business, just coaching overall, because it's all connected. So talking about the energetics of my life, and something that we talked about that was very, very impactful to me, and both Becca and Juliana are so good with, because they've done so much of it in their own life, is, I don't want to call it shadow work. I'd really love to call it Existential Kink, because that's the name of the book that sparked a lot of this for Becca in particular. Juliana, I don't know how you came to this for yourself, but this idea of, am I the drama? I'm not the drama. Am I the villain? I'm not the villain. Oh my God, I am. And this is kind of part of why certain things are playing out for me in my business or in my life, and how understanding this can, and embracing it in a way, can really help us break through. I think that's so cool. So first off, what is this idea of existential kink?
Okay, so for me, I would say it's all about taking accountability for what part you play in what your life looks like right now, and understanding that um you always have a hand to play, and even the things that you complain about, oftentimes there is still a need that is being met. There's still some way that you are benefiting from that thing. So I'll give you a very quick example. Because when I first heard this, I was like, excuse me, like I'm a victim here in everything. And and I don't know, there's lots of like philosophical discussions that you could get into about just like terrible things that happen in the world. And they do talk about that in Existential Kink, but like we don't need to get into all of the philosophy of it. I'll give you a very quick example that she gives in the book. So she talks about, like, say there's an adult man who's in his 20s and he gets fired from his job and he has to go back home and live with his parents. And he's like, and maybe at his job he was like slacking off a little bit, or there was some part that he had to play there. And he has to go back and live with his parents. And he's so like, oh my God, the world is against me. This is terrible. But there's a part of him that is like, excited about it because he maybe had an unmet need from childhood where like he wasn't cared for in all the ways he needed to be cared for. And now he's back home with his mommy and daddy and they're like doing his laundry and nurturing him. And so that part of him that wants that is like, yes, we got what we wanted. And so it's this concept of like kind of taking a step back and looking at all the circumstances in your life and asking, yeah, like, do I have a part to play here? And if I'm really honest with myself, is there any part of me that is like relishing in this in a way? Because, like, for me, it was a lot of it was about victimhood. And there's to me part of feeling like a victim to everything and not ever taking accountability. It like feels good in a way. It feels like it's like emotionally satisfying in some way. That's my like the way I see it. But Jules, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, it's like asking yourself, like, what do I actually enjoy about this? I've been really exploring pleasure in the last little while of my life, and like having birthed humans out of my body, which is like a very painful experience, um, regardless of what you hear on the internet, that it can be pleasurable. But this is actually why they connect. So there is like a whole sect of people that build birth as this pleasure portal, they call it. And it's like there's this idea of birth orgasm. That's a thing. And I remember reading about it and being like, especially after I had my first, I was like, this is a lie. Like this is not possible. But where it is interesting, and where if you haven't had children, or had the experience of being aware or awake during birth, because some people are put under, the closest correlation I've found to this is being tattooed. And there's an entryway into the portal of pain, and you can transmute pain into pleasure. So this is like a whole interesting factor, but like I guess where I would say existential kink comes in is this idea of like, what part of this do I enjoy? Which is a fucked up question if you're thinking about something that you don't like. For instance, your financial position and how little money you make, or the fact that you are constantly needing to be rescued, or your relationship with certain dynamics in a romantic relationship, and maybe they always leave you, and there's this sense of like, oh my God, I'm so sad. But it's like the question is, what part of that do you enjoy? And taking it a step further, it's like, for instance, I have a kink around being rescued. It's like so pleasurable for me to be rescued. And so, of course, I put myself into positions where I'm desperate. That makes sense. Like financially, I'll allow everything to fall apart so that that existential kink of somebody coming in to save me is very much a part of it. And my father has always played that role, and he did when I was quite young. So to me, that was love and nurturing, and I was kind of addicted to it. I wanted him to come. So it makes perfect sense that now in my adulthood, I attract that and I relive the experience over and over again.
Mm, well put. Yeah. And if I can add my little piece to this of what I know of it, at least to be true for me, is there is this, I don't want to, it's not like sick because I know what's going on, but there's this piece for me of the satisfaction of having what I believe about the world, even if it is so negative and so disempowering, being fulfilled. And I can just go, see, I was right. For me, what I realized after our session was I have had a lot of experiences in my past where I've felt people, in particular men, came in and stepped on me for my quote unquote lack of intelligence and used me as a stepping stone to make themselves look good and look smarter. And just brush me off essentially in front of other people. It was so funny for a while. This doesn't happen as much anymore, or at least it shows up in a different way. But I was attracting a lot of guys who still did that to me. And it's looking back, I'm like, I can see myself putting myself into the position where I could see, I'm just like, well, I'm sure that you think I'm stupid. Show me that you think I'm stupid. Right. And if I really looked back on it too, it was almost like I was replaying this psychodrama where I'm like, this time I'm going to kick your ass. This time, like, I want you to show me that you think that about me so I can come in and I can finally win. So I can finally beat the shit out of you and feel like I can rewrite all that stuff that happened to me in the past, which is not something that I came to the conclusion of while we were talking before, but have in the time since. You know, with these examples, some of them can, you know, it's funny with the example of the guy losing his job. I think that is something that we think of a lot, right? Because the answer to how that serves us is pretty obvious, but sometimes it does take a little bit more digging, right? So in Jules's example, I think that would be for me something I would really have to think about. And like, damn, why do I keep ending up in this situation where I feel desperate, like, right? You know, or I feel like quote unquote I couldn't take care of this myself. That is something that it is hidden between or under some of these layers. So, you know, where can we look in our lives to see where we are kind of kinky? What are, to you, some dead giveaways that you've seen in your life? Or if you're working with clients, like, what are some things that they say and you're like, might be a little existential BDSM going on here?
I feel like for me, something that I notice is when you hear people telling the same story over and over again. I think a lot of it is like the stories we tell and what we say. I've noticed this with certain people in my life and with myself and with clients that like sometimes it's almost like the same sentence every time. It's just the same story that they'll say over and over again. And there, at least when I'm experiencing it on a personal level, there is some sort of like, it's a satisfying feeling almost when I'm telling the story. I'm like, yeah, and this always happens to me because things are always harder for me and life's not fair, blah blah blah. And I have had friends kind of say the story of like everybody always leaves me no matter what I do. I'm never good enough. Everybody always leaves me. And so I think that's one of the first places that I don't mean to like trivialize it. I feel like I sound like I'm I'm making fun of all of us who tell these stories because it is painful. Like it's almost like there's different parts of our psyche, and there's one part that's like ha ha ha, that's relishing it, but then there's another part that is in pain. So I don't mean to like mock it, but that is what this book kind of did for me. It gave me this like level of humor to sort of take a step back and look at myself through that lens. Anyway, um yeah, that's the first thing that comes up for me. Jules, what do you think?
I think like repeated patterns, so like exactly what you said, repeated cycles, but sometimes you have to literally be a detective to hear the pattern repeating itself because people are quite cunning, especially people that are in the awareness field of wanting to wake up. We all do this thing. I'm going to speak to my own experience where I'm like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready. And we change through desperation or inspiration. Often people come through desperation, okay, to awareness and awakening, we'll call it. And all this is a recognition of the ways that we keep ourselves stuck in these patterns. Patterns aren't bad by nature, but to understand that they're happening is really important so that you can become aware and therefore change. But it's like this, I've done this thing where I'm like, I'm ready. And I see this in clients often. It's like, then there's busy making over here. Like they start talking, repeat, like talking very quickly and telling stories and being involved over here. And it's almost like they're like, don't look over here, look over there. And as a coach, you know, I've now been in more than 500 hours of one-on-one coaching. So now it's easier for me to perceptively be aware of what's happening. And I no longer, I have a sense of compassion where I'm like, I see you. It's okay. And so often there's a lot of silence that has to happen when that's going on because there's this diversion of like, don't look at the pattern. I don't want to talk about it. I know I said I wanted to be awake and I wanted to be aware, but like, please don't look over here. And so when that starts to happen, there's a lot of compassion and a lot of like, hey, let's just sit in this for a second. Because the same thing that's happened with you since our last session, there's a catalyzation and an information that is integrated within the being. So the work that we do is actually not immediate often. It's like this is over time. So we'll have a session 6 months later, we get people coming back being like, my whole life changed after that. And it's like, well, yeah, not because of us. It's because you chose to look somewhere that you weren't looking before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can imagine as two reflectors, it's pretty hilarious when someone's like, "Don't look over here." And you're like, "That's all I can see." It's like I feel like you're putting a spotlight on it right now. How can I not look at that?
It can be really friggin' challenging, I have to say, because there's sometimes where I want to be like, could you just stop? Like, enough. Like
Hmm.
if it's really sing song dancey monkey dance over there, I'm like, okay. And then in my own personal life, it's tricky too, as especially as a single woman dating. When it's happening right in front of my face, I'm like, wow, the disappointment. And that's the reflector way, like the shadow of disappointment. And I'm like, wow, like it would be an anomaly to not be disappointed at this point.
Yeah.
So
Ugh. Yeah, I get that. And I just wanted to speak to something that was said before too. And I'm sure I'll say this in the intro, but this is something where it's like we have to be so honest with ourselves about this happening. And at the end of the day, we're the only people who can really change it by being honest with ourselves. But it can be really painful and hard to take the first step of saying, I have a role in this. And even though I don't like this, there's a part of me that is getting something from it. And I have to admit that, like, I'm in it and a part of it. And one of the biggest, I've talked about this before on my podcast. People are like, Jesus Christ, we know this happened to you. But one of the biggest things for me was that for a very, very long time, I was stuck in this horrendous eating disorder pattern cycle. I hate my body. I can't stop binge eating. I'm just struggling. I'm so stuck. And it was so weird because there was definitely a part of me at a certain point where I was like, hold on. Okay. This is a circus wheel or a wheel that we're going on around over and over again. And you say you want to get out of this and you want to manifest a life where you feel really good in your body and you're really happy and food relationship is normal. But you keep telling yourself that this is always how it has to be, and you keep repeating the story to yourself, right? Like you are pulling yourself into it, and even when you kind of get out of it, sometimes it's like you are the one who draws yourself back into this. Like you keep repeating the story to yourself, and it came to a day where I was just like, literally, no one else is keeping me here but myself, and so there has to be something in this that I kind of like, or I kind of get out of this. And eventually it was like, well, I'm just very afraid of the emptiness that's outside of that. Like, I don't know what the opposite of that is, right? Because I've just been with this for so long. But it's funny too, because I had a therapist when I was like 17 or 18. And even at that point, it kind of felt like I was keeping this up. And that looking back now, I realize like, oh, all this stuff I didn't want. In some way, I was like keeping up. That's part of manifestation, right? Like we continue the illusion by focusing on it and believing in it. But she pointed out to me, there's a need being filled here. And it's not just that you're hungry. It's, yeah, you starve yourself, which is a part of why you're in the cycle, but there's a need for this cycle. And I looked at her and I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. I can't believe you have a degree. And I just like, and it was, till years later, sorry, Rachel, I love you. She's great. But that I saw that, but it can be really difficult. And I'll tell you that I'm not a reflector. And even I have people reach out to me and they're like, no, Ariana, human design is so hard. Following my design is not easy. Like you are really making light of this. It is so hard. And I just go, yeah, it's just so hard only for you. You're right. It's just, never going to get better only for you. And I have to have compassion for it because I was like that for a lot of my life. I was just talking to my VA about this, but at the same time, it's like I can't lie to you and tell you that like you can get to where you want to be without taking zero accountability for just knowing like you got to wait to respond if you want this system to work for you. Anyway, got off on a tangent there, but speaking of all this too, how does, and taking this maybe into a lighter direction, how does knowing that all of this affects how things show up in our lives via manifestation? How does seeing these patterns and, breaking out of them, this might sound like a simple question, but how does that affect us manifesting what we say we really want or what we do truly want in our souls?
I think it like it takes away all of the fluffy bullshit that doesn't really matter. And I think it helps us get to the heart of like what is actually standing in my way of getting what I want. And then we understand that, like, oh, I'm literally the boss of my life and I can just do that thing. So, something Jules was saying that what a lot of people will do and what we've seen in clients and in ourselves, if they're an entrepreneur, they will kind of complain about like I'm not making any money and like it's so hard for me. And then we might be like, have you done this, and this? And they're like, no. And we've done that. Everybody does that. But what a lot of people do is they spin in circles and they tell stories about like, well, it's because my email system is this or and it's all just made up. Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of ignoring what the heart of the real issue is. So I feel like what this has helped me is to actually just remove all of that is just noise, really, and get to the heart of what we actually have to look at in order to get what we want. And then it's super empowering and it's also terrifying because you're like, oh, I can create whatever I want. I'm the one standing in my way. And then you're like, oh, I can just create whatever I want anytime. Okay.
Oh,
Nice.
fuck.
Yeah.
I also think that there's something to be said about the idea of a cycle being quite dense. So I know we said we are going to lighten it up, but there's something to be said about a cycle is dense. Okay. So what I mean by that is we have to understand that there's an addictive quality. Okay. Nobody really wants to use the word addiction. I've been using it a lot in my vocabulary lately because I'm willing to look at my addictions. And they are addictions. Let's call them what they are. They're a habitual turning to a certain behavior in order to cope with the reality that I'm struggling. We'll call it that. And my struggle might be an absolute dream for somebody else, but for me, it's still a struggle. This is why, people that come from wealthier homes that have never had financial struggle or the struggle with food, let's say, they exhibit the same symptoms of stress and trauma as would somebody that lives in a different part of the world that struggles just to get their medium, like bare necessity, their things met, like their security, their food, their shelter, these things. But in the brain, it triggers the same places. And there's a lot of studies that prove this. So when we look at a cycle and we look at our addiction to the cycle, that's a very dense quality. And when you look at manifestation, to speak to your question, and the idea of achieving your goals and your vision, there's a levity that's necessary in order to get what you want. I think that this is something that's been true to me in the last little while of becoming aware of my circumstances and why I perhaps have not achieved what I'm looking to achieve. It's because I've been really consumed by a heaviness and I've been allowing myself to stay within a dense paradigm. So in order to actually elevate and bring yourself to your vision, there's a lightness that has to happen. There's a recognition. And so I've been really tuning into my body's vibration, movement, yoga, these things that are really important to my foundation. As I do so, I'm able to create levity and movement. And as I do that, then more ideas come and then more manifestation, more doors are open to me. Not because of anything in particular. This is interesting when people combat me with the idea of manifestation. I'm like, it's not that woo woo. Let's take out that word. It really isn't. It's science. Like, this is simple. I become lighter and therefore more doors open. It's like quite simple. I have more access to different environments and more responsiveness from the people around me because they want to help me because I'm light. that's what it creates for you. So when you can recognize the pattern, that's the first step, is just like becoming aware. This is the same in Alcoholics Anonymous. They literally say the very first step to healing is to understand that you have a problem. Like, you're addicted to this pattern. I have to say this before we move to the next. Depersonalize. This is a great way to achieve this. I was actually on a call with a client yesterday and I said, let's depersonalize this. This isn't really about you or your partner. She was going through some partner things. And I was like, let's objectively look at the issue. This is so when people do this fault, blame, shame thing, it's not actually about you. It's a pattern. It's okay. Every single thing inside my being looks at them and thinks like, I see you. I see you beyond that, actually. I see you. And then when I see them and I can sit with them in it and recognize that I love them and the pattern is just behavior, it's the same way I treat my children. I'm not mad at you. I'm really not okay with the behavior. That's how I parent them. I'm not mad at you. I love you. The behavior is not okay. And so recognizing that and recognizing that we have a part to play in it, it's a very empowering place. And it's also so shitty. So it's, and the last thing I'll say on this, I'm sorry if I'm taking up so much space, but it's so important. Or thank you for allowing me. I'm trying to shift that.
Both Becca and I, and people who are not watching, are like, no, we're like shaking our heads.
Take up space. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for allowing me the space to take up space. Something that I've said to myself recently. A pattern. Something that I do is in the Christian church, they call it repentance. And they say if you repent to two or more people, you're like allowing them to carry the burden of your experience and what you've done. We'll put that in air quotes, because what you're really doing is you're admitting, hey, I didn't live in proper alignment. So something that Becca's used to is I literally call her at all hours and every part of the day to say, hey, I got to tell you that I just did this thing. I'm not super proud of it. And she's like, okay. And she holds it with me. And then she'll ask questions like, she's like, yeah, okay, maybe that wasn't the greatest decision. And then she'll say something like, what need is this meeting for you? She asks the right questions. She sits with me in it. She doesn't villainize me for making poor decisions. That's what you need in your experience. Because the idea of shame, blame, fault, all of that stuff, not necessary. Like, why are we doing that to each other? So low vibration. Let's go higher. Let's ask the question, what need is this meeting? What part of you needed that?
Wow, that is super high level. And yeah, if we can do that for ourselves too, oh my gosh, the change that would happen. Let's depersonalize it. Let's not judge ourselves. Let's not shame ourselves for the fact that we have been in this pattern before, because when we can objectively see it, it's like, how can I say this? It's like you've had a pile of dirt in the corner of your house for the past 6 years, and then one day you look up and you're like, oh, there's dirt there. I mean, instead of saying like, how have I not seen the pile of dirt for 6 years? Has it just been here? Oh my God, how many people have taken off their shoes and been like, look at that pile of dirt. Instead, just be like, you wouldn't do that. You just take the broom and like get rid of the pile of dirt. And now you have a clean house. In that scenario, your manifestation was the clean house. You're like, I want a beautiful clean house. And finally see the pile of dirt. But it's funny because we've really covered a lot of like the questions that I already had. We just like went in different directions and flowed there already. But can I actually ask you guys? I would love to talk about how this has benefited you. If you can give me like a couple examples, you can give me an example from your business, or you can give me an example from your life, or if you feel comfortable giving me like a fun example from your client's life. I think that would be really cool for people to hear it too, to see how this can work in action.
I've been thinking about this lately because I feel, I mean, we said this before we started recording, like we've both been on a journey the past couple years that we've been working together in our own transformations. There's been highs and lows, and I feel like we're both in this place where we're being birthed anew. Kind of, it's very exciting, and I feel so much lighter. Like I almost feel like this work is partially responsible for almost like giving me more years of my life back. Like I feel lighter and almost like younger and more playful, if that makes sense. Like there really was such a dense weight on me. And I'll give you one example that Jules is very familiar with. So one of my things was always like, I thought everything I don't wanna say I thought, because there's still part of me that, like, likes to play with this sometimes, okay, but, this came up in business a lot that I just made everything harder than it needs to be, and I was just, like, convinced that everything needed to be, like, such hard work, and there was gonna be all these obstacles, and, like, I was obsessed with all these details, and I really I love feeling like a martyr is part of it. Like I love just feeling like I work so hard and I'm ugh, and I'm such a martyr. And there were times where Jules and one of our a coach that we've worked with would sort of confront me and be like, "Why does this doesn't have to be so hard." And I would feel myself wanting to argue with them for the sake of like, "Yes, it has to be hard." And it made me so mad that you guys would be so chill about stuff that I just felt like I could not be chill about. And it was funny because it was almost like the more I'm with someone who's super chill, I get less chill because I'm like, well, you're so chill. I have to be not chill for both of us because somebody has to worry.
This is
Somebody has
also
to,
very, very fear transference, which Becca and I talk
yeah.
about because we both have
Yes.
fear transference, which is like, technically, we're only supposed to be motivated to take action on something that's based on need. Like, do I actually have to do this? And instead, in the not self theme of our motivation, it's like, I'm going to be motivated by everything that ever has to be done, or else I'll die.
Yeah.
And so will my loved
That's
ones and my business. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
no, that's I you're so right. That is so true. It's so fear transference. And so this was something that was like very present in our business for a long time, and I feel like over the past few months I've really let go of it a lot, and I've been able to see what was underneath it. And I think it's hard to explain this, but I think where it was coming from was like I have never advocated for my own needs. I've been very self-sacrificing my whole life, which my conscious son is gate 22, and the shadow, part of it is about like betraying yourself. It's dishonor is the shadow, but it's like dishonoring yourself by not honoring your own needs. And I think that I felt like maybe if I like can just be such a martyr and such a hard worker and like sacrifice myself so much that like finally people will notice me and like want to care for me, even though I could just instead advocate for my own needs. Anyway, so it allowed me to see that, and I truly feel like 10 times lighter. And I don't know, I mean, I know Jules, like was hard. It was challenging for you to work with that dynamic. Um and I don't know, I feel like a weight has lifted off of me and like, wow, thank God, cuz that sucked.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to the both ends, I want to answer the question of how this work has helped me and our clients. But before I get there, I want to say witnessing somebody else go through that, especially somebody close to you, because our dynamic is different, right? I'm not actually here in the position of coach for Becca. And very similar to a loving relationship, when you're in a romantic partnership, you might have a lot of skills. I have obviously a tremendous amount of emotional intelligence skills, maybe intuitive, borderline psychic, all of these things that are in my being. It's not actually my job to diagnose, to teach, to lead my love, right? That this is something that is super important to me. And it's actually really important as I look out in the world for a potential mate. Now it helps me to assess, okay, you're really not there. It's just that's never going to work with me because I can't be that far ahead. And we'll call it ahead for the sake of this conversation. I don't necessarily think it's ahead. I'm no better than anyone else. I just know how to do better in certain ways. Not in all ways, let's just be honest. Like I mess up way more than I'd like to, but my awareness is at a certain place that I have to be very cautious about who I involve myself with because it's just going to cause heartbreak, if I attach myself to somebody that's not where I am. So with Becca, being in the position of being addicted to the struggle bus, it was a challenge, but not in the way that you think. It wasn't, sure, sometimes it was annoying for sure to be like, can you just stop with your OCD bullshit? Like, can we just stop it. Like you're being weird. And I was just wanting it to like settle down a little bit. But further to that, it was like this beautiful watching somebody that you love so much and being like, oh, that's hard what you're going through. And that sucks. And I love you. And I'm gonna and something that has been really productive for me in rewriting stories about partnership and about love and friendship and sisterhood is looking at Becca and her looking at me and me saying like energetically, I'm never going to leave you. I'm just not. So like be your annoying OCD self if you need to for 3 more years, fine. I'm just going to stand beside you as you heal. And like, and having that has been transformative for me on like an emotional connective level, which has allowed me to just understand that it's not our role actually always to teach and guide. I do that for a living and I'm proud of what I do, but it's not actually my job to do in my personal relationships. What I commit to is standing beside my friends and my family and saying, I'm going to love you despite your cycle. Yeah, sure, I'm aware of it. And I'm like, damn, especially like my sister and my mom. I'm like, wow. Like, how do you get dressed in the morning? But in the same token, my job is to love them through that. And that can change the world. Mother Teresa said, if you want to change the world, first go home and love your family. And that's really important to me. So that was something that I watched you go through. And I'm also really proud of you for the work that you've done in transforming it, even though it's still there a little bit. I can see it sometimes. um, and to how the okay, so this is great. This question that you asked of like, how is this transformed? What I realized the other day was recognizing, and this whole idea of existential kink and just being aware of your cycles, the work that we do both with our clients and our own lives and the people that we just happen to be in connection with, for instance, you, when we're in these meetings, and even now your listeners and the people that are here. So by proxy, we're really extending the expansion of like how we're learning and how we show up in the world. Yeah. So like we're changing lives just by like being here in connection, but it's not because we're special. It's because the work is so amazing. The byproduct of this work, sure.
I
Yeah.
was
Okay.
just gonna be like both. I keep remembering that like people can't necessarily see my faces, so but you guys can. I'm like,
I
well,
thought
it's
you
a
were
little bit of both.
little of both. Okay, sure. I'll pay tribute to my excellence as a unique human being in this world and love that. And also the work is so beautiful. What the work has allowed us to do is literally transmute at a speed that most people don't do in 20 years. This is very, very important. Many people, our parents' generation especially, this kind of work that we're doing in our lives, they don't even look at this shit. This isn't even a part of their psyche. So the fact that we're moving through this, we might think that we've been in the depths of hell for a year, and we have essentially, like, we've transmuted a lot. But the speed to which we are moving and the speed to which we have the access to ascend and transform and create is because we're committed to the treacherous horrors of this work. Because like admitting your shit and like really holding it is pretty terrible. But once you commit to that and you're like, oh, I'm not going to die. It's awful, but like I can trust that the awful leads me somewhere beautiful. And when I do that, I move faster. And like I'm 40, I just became very aware of my impermanence here on this planet. I was like, look at what I've done in 40 years. And then my brain transformed and transmuted. And I was like, yo, these next 40 years are going to be pretty cool.
Pretty dope.
And so to speak to our clients and what we've experienced with them, it was like it's such a testament to our work we consistently have clients that will turn around and within a year of coaching with us in a group program, they'll be like, my entire life has changed, and we watch it happen. And so it's hard, like the days go by and we're like, does our work even matter? Like, that's how it feels sometimes. I'm like, should I get a job? I'm looking on Indeed because you forget about like the significance of what you're doing, because the ROI on this work, you're not turning around and you can't see the transformation in a day, in 24 hours, and even a week, but you see little incremental changes. And then after a year, we have clients that come to us that are like, the person I was when I came to you a year ago is not the person I am today. That's the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny too, because I think it feels when you're in it that it is going so slowly. Because the other day I was looking at my life and being like, God, I'm making no progress. Nothing is changing. And you really do look a year back and you think, actually, it feels like a snap since I've been there. And so much has changed, which is a different conversation, I guess. But just to speak to what you were saying, to anyone going through this, don't give up, because before you know it, it is going to feel like you have made some changes. If you're willing to take some of the accountability that we've been talking about, that's how you can really start. And that's where it does start. And it can be so, so beautiful. But anyway, this has been so incredible. And this actually kind of went in a few different directions than I was expecting, but that is like to be expected when I talk to you guys, that it goes in an even better direction than I could have planned. So thank you so much for your wisdom today. I know this is going to help a lot of people, and anyone listening, remember, I know at first it will be a little painful to look at yourself in the mirror and say, like, I like relationships where guys tell me I'm dumb. Like, there's something in that you're not calling yourself dumb. You're not saying you want to keep emotionally eating. You're not saying you love being broke, for sure. This is just the first step. And it might feel a little bit painful, but at the end of the day, like we said, if you can have compassion for yourself, this podcast is called Just Follow Joy. This is all about eventually getting yourself to a place where you do feel more joy, and asking yourself. And part of that is asking yourself where you're kind of holding yourself back. And if I could say one more thing, like, to me, it's funny because it feels like we're blaming ourselves, but at the end of the day, we're actually taking the most agency possible that we could to like make our lives into what we want. So when you guys brought this to my attention, and of course I'd learned about this kind of stuff beforehand, like you have a role in what you manifest in what's your life. You were a powerful creator. Well, I've heard that before. It was really working with you guys that, brought it to my awareness in the most compassionate way possible. If you guys want to work with Becca and Jules, I'm telling you, they're some of the best people to do this with. Like, none of what they said hurt me. I was just brought it to my awareness. When I worked with you, it really did help me see, like, wow, I am so much more powerful in ways than I even realized, because I have been deciding to do certain things that have not been serving me, that I didn't even see, and like leaning into certain beliefs. And now that I see that, I can decide differently, and I can create a life that I love even more, because that's what's meant for all of us, I think. But anyway, that's it for me. Guys, really, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. This was amazing, as usual.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And for anyone that is listening, I would hope that I want you to remember that the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek.
Mm,
Amen.
amen. Anyway, you guys rock. Everyone listening, you rock. And I will talk to you next time.